It was just after sunset when the city lights flickered awake like stars in a restless sky, and at the edge of the luxurious downtown district, where crystal windows shimmered and fine restaurants hummed with laughter and indulgence, a young woman named Amina stood under the stale glow of a flickering street lamp holding her trembling child close, her heart beating with a familiar ache that had become a constant companion. She had walked miles with blistered feet for a chance, just a chance, to find something to feed the baby in her arms, whose tiny hands were too weak to even grasp her worn shawl, and as the gentle rumble of cars and spirit of the crowded streets pressed around her, she felt both invisible and unbearably vulnerable, until at the polished entrance of a restaurant that seemed to breathe warmth and laughter, she mustered a voice fragile as wine through autumn leaves and whispered to a passing stranger, "May I have your leftovers, sir?" A plea as humble as it was desperate, unaware that the man she addressed, dressed in an immaculate suit and emanating an aura of wealth that suggested the world bowed before him, was none other than Jonathan Raleigh, a billionaire whose rise from humble beginnings was the stuff of fairy tales, yet whose eyes had long since grown cold with disappointment at life's promises unmet. Jonathan paused mid-stride, his sharp gaze meeting Amina's tired eyes that glistened with hope and hunger, and in that instant, something inside him paused too, like a distant memory of his own childhood when his mother's arms had been the only warmth he knew, and her whispered prayers the only comfort he had ever felt, and he saw in her eyes not just hunger, but an unbreakable spirit that refused to yield to despair, a spark he thought he had lost in boardrooms and transactions that measured human worth in profit margins rather than compassion. And so instead of turning away, he knelt down to her level, brushing aside the invisible walls that his wealth had built around his heart, and asked softly, "What's your name?" As though in that single question, he could bridge the vast expanse between their worlds. Amina blinked, startled by his kindness, and when she answered in a voice woven with gratitude and the fragility of long struggle, Jonathan felt a stir of something unfamiliar yet profoundly moving, like a chord struck deep within his soul, and he instinctively removed his expensive coat, wrapping it around her shoulders before ordering the restaurant staff to prepare a warm meal not just for her and her child, but for anyone else in need that night, declaring that hunger was never a test of worth and that dignity must always precede charity. And as they shared the meal together, the crowd outside, accustomed to ignoring the less fortunate, watched with a shimmering of curiosity and wonder, questioning their own indifference in that moment where one man's gesture became a quiet revolution of empathy. Jonathan, once a man whose successes were measured in skyscrapers and stock portfolios, found himself humbled by Amina's resilience, her courage to ask for help without shame, and by the sheer purity of her smile when she whispered, "Thank you," and in that gaze, he didn't see a stranger, he saw the reflection of a man he might have been, had life dealt different cards, and the miracle that happened was not some supernatural event, but a profound awakening within him, a realization that true wealth is not stored in vaults or reflected in quarterly earnings, but in the capacity to uplift another human being, to restore hope where it was fading, and to give compassion a chance to change the world one heart at a time. By the time the night had fully settled and the city lights flickered with their usual brilliance, the story of that one act of generosity, simple yet transformative, had begun to weave itself through the streets, as others offered blankets, food, and warm smiles to strangers they had once ignored, proving that when one heart chooses kindness, miracles aren't just possible, they ripple outward and invite others to believe that every life has dignity, every voice deserves to be heard, and every soul is capable of shining light into the darkness of another's despair. And as Amina and her child walked away with newfound strength, and Jonathan watched them go with eyes misted by unexpected emotion, he whispered a vow to himself that his success from that moment forward would not be measured by wealth alone, but by the number of lives he would touch with compassion, proving that sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage, one chance encounter, one willingness to care, to change two worlds forever in a single heartbeat.